Hi, everybody. Welcome to this evening's event for the continuation of the Sunnyvale Sustainability Commission's seminar series, lecture series. I'm Steve Zornitzer. I'm on the Sustainability Commission and a subcommittee for helping to select our speakers for the Sustainability Series. Just a little housekeeping before we introduce our speaker. Actually, we have two speakers tonight. I'll introduce them both. If you've had refreshments, you'll appreciate the fact that all of our refreshments tonight are in a zero waste environment. We're not wasting anything. There's no trash to create tonight. So we want to walk the walk and talk the talk here. Take a second now to please silence your cell phones if you haven't already done so. The last thing we need is people's phones to interrupt and distract us. This event tonight is being live broadcasted and recorded, so residents of Sunnyvale who couldn't attend this evening can go to the TV station, the local TV station, and be able to watch this lecture at another time as well. I don't think there's any overflow seating, but if extra people come in and take up all the seats, this lecture will be also broadcast in the room where the refreshments were, as we're in parallel with this. There's restrooms in the lobby, both on the right and left side. If there's an earthquake or some kind of a disaster here, please file out in an orderly fashion into the lobby and go out into the parking lot. There will be Q&A afterwards, after the speaker finishes. And there are some resources on the back table for checking out more interesting facts and things you can do in your own homes to increase your ability to conserve water and be more efficient with your water usage. Now, the last thing I want to say before I introduce our speaker here, our first speaker, is that the next Sustainability Speaker Series event will be held in March, on March 11th. The speaker will be Patrick Sigman, and this is something that's near and dear to all of us. It's all about traffic and what we can do and what has been done and what is being done in other cities to promote less traffic and create better places. And how can Sunnyvale get there? So I think that'll be a really interesting lecture for us as well, and one that I know that we all can relate to. Also, we do appreciate your feedback on this lecture series. Your opinion about whether or not the lectures are relevant, useful, interesting, important for your own daily lives and your own ability to influence sustainability in your homes. That's something that we want to hear from you about, because if we're not doing a good job, what can we do better? So please give us feedback. There are forms in the back, and they'll be handed out at the very end of the lecture as well, that you can fill out to give us that feedback. That's really important, because there's no point in doing this if this isn't of value to you. That's the whole point of that. So before we begin with our key speaker this evening, I wanted to introduce Sunnyvale's own Mansour Nasser. He's a Water and Sewer Systems Division Manager for the city. And he's going to say just a few words on what the city's doing right now and the great progress we're making, really, in Sunnyvale with regard to water management. So, Mansour.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview about where does Sunnyvale's water come from and how have we been doing. But before that, I always like to start with a trivia question. Does anybody know who is credited with founding Sunnyvale? Murphy. Martin Murphy. So anybody who got it right, who think got it right, you get a free shower head. It's in the back. And anybody who got it wrong also gets a free shower head. Anyways, so one thing about the Murphy family, if you drive around Sunnyvale, I was kind of intrigued. Murray Avenue, Murray is was Murphy's wife. Matilda, Maud, and Evelyn were her daughters. So just in case, if you didn't know, that's where the names came from. Anyway, so in Santa Clara County, 55% of our water comes from the Delta or from the SFPUC. So a high percentage of our water in Santa Clara County comes from outside the area. This is a picture of Sunnyvale. This is a map of Sunnyvale. To the north, we have 6 connections with the San Francisco Water Department, or the SFPUC. And way to the south, there's 2 dots by Highway 85. We have 2 connections with Valley Water. So 50% of our water comes from the north, and the other 50% comes from the south, and they get mixed and they meet around along El Camino Avenue. So you get a blend if you live in that area. This is a kind of a pie chart of where our water comes from. Mostly it's 50-50. Last year is about 53%, but historically it was 50%, and as we project forward, we're seeing it's going to be about 50-50, so from Hetch Hetchy and from Valley Water. One thing interesting is, as you can see here, is that as Sunnyvale's population has gone up, water use has gone down. So in 1985, right before the 87 drought, was about 30,000 acre-feet we used, and last year in 2019, we used about 18,000 acre-feet. So we went way down in our water usage in Sunnyvale. So that gives you per capita use, which is interesting. Per capita use is, if you take all the water used in Sunnyvale, including irrigation companies, and you divide it by Sunnyvale's population, back in 77, about 196, 85, the highest year, 241. Last year, we were at 108. And during the drought in 2015, we were way down to 96 gallons per capita per day. So you can see Sunnyvaleans have been doing a great job, whether it's the businesses and the residents. This is a graphic representation on where we were supposed to be. There's a Assembly Bill 7X. By 2020, we were supposed to be at 139 gallons per capita per day. But I just mentioned to you back last year, we were at 108. So we've already exceeded the state goal for Sunnyvale. How did we do during the drought? In the drought, 2013 was the base year for the drought. So cities were required to reduce their water use based on what they used in 2013. This chart shows you that Sunnyvale, we reduced between 13% to 26%. That doesn't take into account the population growth, so just straight numbers. Even last year, we still haven't recovered from what we used back in 2013. So everybody, again, is still doing a great job. As we look forward ahead, what's interesting about that is in 2035, we plan to use less than we did back in the year 2000. Water has gone down, as you can see, dipped because of the drought, but it's going to recover. But even when it recovers, it's just going to recover back to what it was back in 2000. That's not happening by accident. We have water conservation programs. We partner with the Water District and the Bay Area Water Conservation Agency, and these are the programs. We have residential program, landscape programs, agricultural programs, outreach, and we work with the Water District. And, as I said, BOSCO, or the Bay Area Water Supply Conservation Agency. These are the programs we have for residents. We do provide shower heads, aerators. We can come to your home to do water audits to see if you're using your water efficiently. So it's always going to be work in progress. We're never going to give up. We're going to continue doing our best in reducing water use. So some permanent prohibitions we have. I'm listing them here, but restaurants are supposed to only provide water if customers ask for it. If you go wash your car, please use a shut-off valve. Don't have any runoff to go into the sidewalk or the streets. And finally, except for health and safety reasons, hardscape should be swept and not be washed away. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mansour. Thank you, because all of you are helping us perform in water efficiency much better than we did before. So whatever we're doing, we got to keep doing it, and do it better even. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Felicia Marcus, our main speaker this evening. Let me give you a little bit of background about Felicia. Felicia is a consultant and an attorney, and has most recently served as a member and chair of the State Water Resources Control Board for the state of California, and was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown for that role. The board implements both federal and state laws regarding drinking water and water quality, and it implements the state's water rights laws. And during Felicia's tenure, the board tackled a wide range of challenges, including dealing with the worst drought in California's modern history, leading efforts to elevate water conservation, water recycling, and stormwater capture to a much higher level, consolidating drinking water and clean water functions, achieving an historic groundwater management framework for the state, greater focus on salton sea restoration and other special places around the state, and balancing agricultural, ecological, and urban interests in the contentious San Francisco Bay Delta. I suspect we'll hear more about that this evening. Before her appointment to the Water Board, Felicia served in positions in government, in the nonprofit world, and the private sector. In government, Felicia served as the regional administrator of the U.S. EPA Region 9, located in San Francisco, which governs all of California and the western states. She is also currently an Obama administration appointee to the Commission on Environmental Cooperation, Joint Public Advisory Council, consisting of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Prior to that, Felicia headed Los Angeles Department of Public Works. In the nonprofit world, she was the Western Director for the Natural Resources Defense Council, and was the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Trust for Public Land. She's also a private and nonprofit sector attorney in Los Angeles. In short, Felicia looks at issues from a number of perspectives: environmental activist, federal and state government regulator, utility and local government manager, and national and international water policy advisor. Her talk tonight is titled, California's Rise to Water Resiliency. What will it take? So let's please give Felicia Marcus a warm welcome.
Thank you, Steve. I love your voice, so I want you to give my presentation. Listen. Really great. Good evening, everyone. Let's make sure. Let's see if I... There we go. I'm actually here today because you actually are the people who can help California make it through your personal actions, through your professional actions, and through your engagement in demanding action through the political process at all levels. We're facing challenges to all of our Earth systems, let alone our California water system, that are accelerating at an unprecedented rate, much of it brought on by climate change, which is actually a freight train of pain coming at us on so many levels, faster and faster all the time. And you add to that the filling of our oceans with plastics, the despoiling of ecosystems across the globe to meet the demand for cheap goods or fancy phones, and the development and generation of chemicals, both toxic and endocrine disrupting, and that are bathing us daily. And the time is really now to act. Business as usual on every level, personal, professional, political, you name it, will not get us to a sustainable or a resilient future unless we accelerate it. And it's not what our children deserve from us. I'll tell you my conclusion right up front, lest I seem too severe. I think that sustainability and resilience are about more than engineering infrastructure or even personal choices. They require a suite of changes to the way we do business in politics, in business, and with each other. That's pretty complex, and it requires us to stretch and to engage. business as usual, and I don't just mean economic business, is the path to disruption, dissolution, and decay for our society. And I actually believe the public is way ahead of most politicians on this one, at least potentially. So I am particularly grateful from the bottom of my heart. I used to say from the bottom of my little regulatory heart, but I'm not doing that today, for joining us today, and for the fine folks at Sunnyvale for inviting me. My thanks at the outset to the committee for inviting me, and to Steve Sorensen and Crystal Wickham, to Elizabeth Greenfield and Emma Nutzel for their help in my preparation on this. And thank you, Mr. Mansour, for that great overview of the Clean Water Program. We didn't even get to the recycle water part, which I've been watching for 30 years and was pretty darn cool. No purple pipe maps or anything. There's a lot more there. So thank you all for the honor of addressing you today. Today I am going to talk about the challenge of dealing with the future water in California primarily, and how critical local leadership and action has always been and will always be. I'm going to warn you that my pace will be rapid, and my goal is not to give you 3 points to consider that I'm going to tell you about, explain, tell you about again, and then remind you what I told you, which I know is the way a lot of people do their speeches, and it's useful at times. My goal instead is to take you on a ride through California water issues, flag some solutions and some things that I think are needed to give you a menu of ideas to ponder and insights to integrate into your thinking, because you're clearly thoughtful people, or dare I say nerds or geeks, to give up your evening for me. So I am assuming that you are kindred spirits who want to see more progress made. I'm just going to give you a lot of food for thought that you can use in any way you want, and we can come back to anything in the discussion afterwards that I gloss over or leave out entirely. I also have a lot of slides, many of which I'm going to spend only a few seconds on, and some of which I'm going to linger on, so don't fear this pile of paper in front of me. I actually have the pile of paper and notes to say less. I just want that to be clear. First of all, this is how most people approach any conversation about California water, and the Bay Delta in particular. And I will say that's in part because many folks who work on it talk about it this way precisely so that fewer people are inspired to engage. In fact, I think California is quite knowable, it's quite definable, it's quite fixable, or at least improvable. We just need to apply the right tools and the right attitude. At the outset, I want to talk a little bit about sustainability and resilience, and I think it's sustainability and resilience are called for in the work we do, as well as developing comfort with complexity, which is very difficult to do in almost any context I can think of, but it's what we need to do. I'm not going to go all Merriam-Webster on you and get into definitions, but I wanted to stake out the concepts a little bit before diving in so you can see the context of how I'm approaching this. Sustainability is great. Some people make it an either or. I don't see any point to that. It's a both and. It's great. I think of it as using materials responsibly in the first instance and figuring out how to reuse and recycle as well. You've been working on these issues since I was at EPA in the 90s, so I genuflect before this community. Circular economy is another set of buzzwords and things that people are talking about, particularly in the business community, area of production and manufacturing. I think cities have been on sustainability for a while with conservation, water recycling, conservation efficiencies in energy, reduce, reuse, recycle, and solid waste. All good. Keep it going. I think it's fantastic. But resilience adds something a little different and a bit more ominous in some ways, which is figuring out how to both deal with uncertainty and the lack of predictability, particularly that climate change is introducing into so many systems, and to deal with disruption and disaster in a way that you can recover faster and you can be prepared faster. That's really quite different than just thinking sustainability in a bubble. Again, it's not this or that, it's a both and there are a little differences and a little more challenge, frankly, to dealing with resilience in terms of what's to come, creating a society that can survive off into the future more. And I just watched the new Godzilla movie last night, so I'm trying not to have this overlay of that awful sense that you have to get rid of half of us to make it work. I'm not there, I'm not in that science fiction space, although I really like Godzilla, and that was my only Godzilla picture. I am just saying, famous for many of them in a thing. But I think it is a bit more ominous because we have to deal with that uncertainty and that disruption, which is what we're going to need to deal with it, and because we're going to have all these curveballs thrown at us by climate change, and that there's no normal anymore. There's not a new normal. There's just nothing normal. Not that California water has ever been particularly normal. It's going to be even more abnormal than is normal. That's so not quotable. But I think it requires a lot more than smart engineers and public involvement for it's public support for investment in infrastructure and public engagement in the behavioral changes we all need to apply, like conservation, efficiency, and recycling. It's going to require systems thinking, flexibility, and relationships across different sectors with different languages and different professional divides and different cultures. It's going to require taking an even longer view than we take. Our traditional budgets are 1 year or 5 years, or even the kind of infrastructure planning we've done to estimate what population will be, what sea level will be, whatever it is, over 30 years or 50 years of a project. We can't do that anymore. We're going to have to build systems that are more interchangeable, that are more flexible, that have more buffers, and it requires us building the ability to adapt to uncertainty into what we do. And that's on the scary side. On the cool innovation side, we need to be flexible so we can take advantage of technological advances and stuff that are coming at us just as rapidly as climate change, fortunately. And you have some experts on that in the office. So we have to take a systems approach from the top of the watershed to the bottom and back again in order to get what Ellen Hannock of PPIC calls more pop per drop, i.e. looking at your flood control, water quality, water supply, and urban greening, et cetera, pulling it all together to figure out how you make that whole system work more efficiently so that you can make the best use of scarce local dollars. We're never going to be able to afford to deal with these issues if we continue in the silos we're in and we don't integrate. But that is very hard emotionally, culturally, professionally, et cetera, and it's very complex. So it also requires different kinds of communication and a lot more investment in communication, site visits, tours, engaging the public. And we also need public support to be able to do the bigger investments it's going to take at the front end to save us a lot of money at the back end. It's a heady task, but I think it's one we can rise to, and I'm going to dance through some examples of why we have to act with urgency, and then to lift you from the depths of despair that I may put you in, I am going to give you signs of hope that are accelerating really, really quickly, even in the last few years, and some tips on how to manage the transition that applies to individual cities, businesses, and agencies. So I'm going to jump ahead. I also think the skills that it takes to work across divides are underrated and the most important in doing this work. So I am going to spend a little bit of time on that. There are people who really look for that silver bullet or magic wand answer, and you will hear people saying, if everybody just did X, it would solve our problems. Those people are wrong. I don't care what the issue is. And it really requires us looking at a bunch of component parts and knowing that one size doesn't fit all, because all watersheds are different, all situations are different. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that to see what I mean. But one size doesn't fit all, but parts can be replicated. So everybody's looking for sort of the McDonald's approach. You know, what's the mixed solution that we can all apply? When in fact, it's not completely all customized and bespoke. There are different things that people are using all over the country and all over the world we can go shopping in. So I always say it's more like a Mr. Potato Head solution. I was doing a lot of thinking around the holidays, and there were a lot of toys involved. The other thing is we need more than resilient infrastructure. We need resilient institutions, and we need more resilient relationships. And as I said, there are signs of hope, so I'm going to move on to that, but I don't want that to be forgotten. This is the slide my husband hates, because there are too many words on this slide. I will cop to that as a slide. This is not a sustainable slide. I understand that. But this is my wallet card, and I have made wallet cards out of this, laminated them, and handed them out over the years. And so this is my gift to you today. Most of these other pages just back it up, but these are things you really need to know in any conversation about California water. On the upside, it's to make you more effective in engaging in conversations that sometimes people do want to disempower you in. And at a minimum, it will arm you at dinner parties and cocktail parties to deal with the jerk who says if only those expletive, and call them bureaucrats or enviros or agriculture or whoever it is, would do this one thing, it would solve California water, and they're all a bunch of idiots or they're all evil. That is the nature of the discourse in California water most of the time. So you may be wondering or distracted by not Godzilla, but an elephant. And the reason why I put the elephant on it is that I was in, I've worked in all facets of California water, north, south, quality, supply, different levels of government. But I spent 7.5 years in the Clinton administration, and a big part of that was negotiating the Bay Delta Accord and the other. There's a moment of peace, right, in the water world, and it's a fairly small circle of key players who are in every conversation on Bay Delta, and I want to grow that group of people. But I ran screaming out of that and into land conservation at the end of my time at EPA. I went to TPL because I wanted to work with people who knew how to make a deal, who knew how to work with unlikely allies versus throwing their talking points past each other louder and slower across the decades. And I just wanted to work with people who like to get stuff down on the ground with other people that they didn't know before, get to know and then negotiate and get to a park or a playground or saving a forest or whatever it was. And then 7 years later, I got drawn back in because I guess they needed their social worker. You'll see I'm more of a social worker than anything else in this world. And I was struck by the parable of the blind man and the elephant, where they're each touching a part of this creature and describing something completely different that can't possibly be a whole. And they know they're part of it really well, but it doesn't all come together. And that's what California water is like. Because I came back 7 years later, it was largely the same people and same players. A little older, a little grayer, a little heavier maybe, but they were the same people saying the same thing past each other, even though they had been in rooms with each other, and they are still doing it to this day with some progress made, and so hence the elephant. So here are the key things you need to know, and I won't get into all the detail, but I'm happy to send you the card if you like. We have the most variable hydrology in the country, and one of the most variable. What does that mean? You know this, we have dries and wets and you can't predict them. We're more variable than anywhere else in the country, and that means something in terms of how you would set up a water system here, separate from a place that has more consistent dries or more consistent wets. We'll get to that. It doesn't fall where it's used. It's different. It's not uniform across the state and the time of year. Most places in the country, it rains in the summer. I'm just saying, if you're a lifelong Californian, we have a Mediterranean climate, and when it rains, it really rains, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. You saw that through the drought, but what does that mean? That means you've got to have storage, right? And I'm going to get back to that, which we need more than other places need. That doesn't mean all storage is good in all places, but it means we've got to acknowledge the fact that we need storage. Storage has been a dirty word in some of those talking points. Modern California does not exist without storage. It just doesn't. So we've got to figure it out. There's some good news there. Every place has a totally different mix of sources. You saw some of your mix of sources. Surface, some people have surface water. They can see actually go by where they are. The majority of Californians don't. It comes from hundreds of miles away. That's a miracle of modern social engineering and infrastructure unseen in history. I mean, it's one of the marvels of public works in the world. It's had a cost, right? And the part of the cost is to the environment, which we won't spend as much time on because it could eat the whole discussion. I'll save it for the discussion if people want to go there. But it creates its own challenges. So most people don't know, particularly in large urban areas. I guarantee you in small rural areas, people know where their water comes from and when it runs dry much more. Groundwater is intensely local. It's under our feet. It's challenging. This area understands its groundwater and has more active management than almost anywhere in the state. But most people don't know it because it's literally underground. You can't see it, and it can vary from here to the edge of the block. So it's very complicated. You can have one area with a lot of groundwater, 100% dependent. You have some areas that have none and wish they had some, and then you have other places that have a mix, and they have a mix depending on the year. So everything is different. Water rights vary. I'm not going to get into that much today, but as you saw during the drought, you panned to a fallow field, but if you had actually panned to the left or the right, you might have seen a really lush field, because it wasn't so much that that area was out of water, but one guy was a senior water rights holder and the other one was a junior water rights holder. And in our system, when there's a shortage on surface water at least, the most junior person going up the line gets cut off 100%. In favor of the next guy above them. It's a very harsh system, comes out of the Old West. They took a mining sort of system and grafted on water. Water was just another thing to be extracted in their mindset, and so that impacted the drought really varies greatly. It's a complex system. So they're a mix of solutions, as you can see. You got the conservation, recycling, stormwater, and desal in the appropriate places. Integrated water management is obviously movement, and you need storage. And I say it 4 times because we need it above ground, below ground, big, and small, versus what you'll hear in the conversation is like one big dam will somehow save us. Elevating Shasta will solve the problem. No, it won't. It's actually much more complicated than that. And the only thing big enough to compensate for the climate change impacts I'm about to talk about are our groundwater basins. And that's why the administration preceding this one prioritized groundwater management as the big political lift that took 100 years to get in California. Last state in the West to have statewide groundwater management, politically challenging but essential to deal with climate change. You see some of the basics about our population growing, etc. I've talked about some of it. We're one of only 5 Mediterranean climates in the world that can grow the level of healthy fruits and vegetables that we grow. So agriculture is not something to dismiss or take for granted. It's really significant. We're very lucky to have it. Biodiversity issue, very fragmented water agencies and that stuff. But this climate change and other drivers as game changers is the key point I want to leave you with here, which is that for all the complexity of that system, with just a few degrees rise in temperature, we end up with the same amount of precipitation. Let's assume that, and that's likely, but more is going to fall as rain rather than snow. Well, what does that mean? That means we lose our snowpack, and the predictions get more and more dire every year. And why is that important? Because in an average year, snowpack is fully 1/3 of the state's entire storage. So imagine what we went through in the drought. You saw where we had the lowest snowfall, snowpack that we had seen in modern history. It makes everything harder in terms of this incredible system we have. It means we're going to have bigger problems, less to buffer those changes. We're also going to have more flooding in the spring, which is really a big problem. You saw the story out of Stanford just this week, that it's not a one-to-one relationship. As you get more rain rather than snow, your flooding risk increases by 2.5 times, just because of the velocity of what's coming at us and the fact that when you get all that rain, it also melts more snow quickly. So the worst thing we were scared about each one of these years during the drought, any year in particular, no matter how big your snowpack is, you really worry about warm rain in March. Not only because you're going to lose your snowpack, but because that's when you have those floods. So that meant we had to do something, which is why the governor said we had to do a lot more than some people thought we should during the drought, but he also wanted to deal with this issue because he saw it as a problem 30 years out, 20 years out, just like he did energy 30 years ago, and why in the last administration, though we didn't do everything, I think we accelerated the pace of work at the state level by decades compared to the glacial pace that's usual in water. I'm not saying we were fast. I'm just saying we accelerated the pace by decades. So California water is sort of like reverse dog years, I think, in terms of how people think. So let me just flash through the slides so you can see I'm not just making it up. There's the variable. This just gives you a little sense of how variable it is. This gives you the seasonal mismatch. This is just the you are here or not here thing from the urban side. Here's very much a you are here slide. This is this incredible network of infrastructure that makes modern California possible, both urban areas and not just Southern California, also San Francisco area and the East Bay. If you look at this network of infrastructure, the green ones tend to be more individual. It's not quite right, but you see the Owens Valley Aqueduct at the bottom. Everybody who thinks they've seen Chinatown think they understand Los Angeles water. Not. It is now more like, it's like 15% of the water supply in Los Angeles. They've diversified quickly, but they're more reliant on the Delta than they like to think. They're starting to really realize it. But look at the East Bay mud system and the SFPUC system also divert from the Delta. They just do it above where the pumps are. But make no mistake, you are taking water out of that Delta that impacts the fish and wildlife and ecosystem just as much as Southern California. That is my message as a Southern Californian and as a former state official to you, that you can't put your head in the sand. That's your ecosystem and your historical heritage, and you're having an impact on it. The beauty of it is that you've been doing more about it than a lot of other communities, and so I thank you for that as well. And then you have the state and federal project. We can come back to any of this if you like. This is a scary picture. This was not a wallet card. This was the Post-it, the picture, the the copy on my bathroom mirror all through the drought to remind us of what we had in store. It happened during the drought. It's going to happen again. We talked about a lot of this. I'm going to move. And so Governor Brown, I took that out, okay. Governor Brown, to do that, we put together a water action plan. I'm not going to talk about all of it because we don't have time, just flagging things for you today. And it was sort of a 10-point, easily readable plan to lay a foundation for a sustainable water future. And it was fairly revolutionary just because it put everything out there, like an initial strategic plan, to say we have to do all of this. This is all of the above. Quit arguing about which one's more important. We have to do it all to deal with that loss of snowpack. We, meaning we being important, have to do it all, and we're going to go. Like, come with us if you want to live. We're going to be in action and work on this. You guys can keep talking about it, and we'll talk to you, but we're not just going to sit for another decade. We're going to get in motion. Governor Newsom took the account and very nicely, explicitly said he was going to build on the water action plan. There's a draft out of the portfolio. It was due for an update, much more detailed. Still needs more detail and more focus, but there's a lot of good stuff in there about multiple benefit use, about using technology and innovation. It's really good. Now, you can't talk about California water without talking about the drought. This quote from Ben Franklin, "Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy." It just happens to be one of my favorite Benjamin Franklin quotes, and it goes on to something I'm going to show you later. It has nothing to do with the drought. This one does. When the well is dry, we know the worth of water. Okay, worst drought in modern times. We've talked about why. Here's another graph for those of you who like graphs. That's how bad that snowpack was that year. It was all, I didn't get any sleep that year for sure. That's why we did some of the dramatic things we did that some people didn't like. Some people didn't think it was far enough. You guys were great on the conservation, the mandatory conservation rules that the governor asked for. You had much lower targets than you met because you were already so good. When I came here for meetings with the water agencies, with Santa Clara Valley Water Agency, they just told me to make it higher. Give us a higher target. And it was like, I love you guys. Because everywhere else I went is, why are you being so mean? So it was great. Well, then that was the snow the next year. So it's really, really variable. This is not really a good trajectory of the ups and downs, another view of it. That was Folsom. You think the people in Sacramento were scared? That was pretty horrible. And then impacts people out of work, people out of water in the Central Valley. One of the weird silver linings of the drought was that they got media coverage on this with the taps running dry that got us resources, legal authorities, and all kinds of things we didn't have at the state board to help them. When they've been drinking, when they have water, it's totally toxic and they shouldn't be drinking it. And now we have the money and the infrastructure, and you'll start seeing a lot of those communities coming back to life. It's a strange thing, but that became because the public generally became aware of it, and then politicians need to respond. This is going to be it's not anti-politician, it's reality. We had 500,000 fields fallowed, acres, and Fish and Wildlife just got hammered. We did a lot. I'm not going to talk about it all. We mentioned the recycling. We did a lot on recycled water and the like. Just a point here about how the media can cover things and it can be frustrating. You know, there was this whole thing about how El Nino was going to save us, and so people wanted to stop conserving. And I was like the anti-El Nino is coming debunker all over the place. And although it's one of the ads that talked about, and the New York Times referred to me as the water czar, which I hated, by the way, because I'm here because my grandparents fled pogroms, so being the czar is not a good thing in my family. But he kept using it because he knew I didn't like it, although we were friends, but he was tweaking me. But he actually quoted me because he thought he was doing me a favor. Whenever, public official sounds like regular person is doing you a favor, because most don't. My quote, New York Times, front page story. When people bring up El Nino, I'm like, comment, no! All caps, exclamation point. I thought, great. All that history will say is that she must be from the San Fernando Valley, which is actually true. But I don't even talk that way very often, which is sort of strange. But I use it because I do have another Godzilla. There you go. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. What's happening? Sorry. But it was the wake-up call, or the Godzilla of all wake-up calls. So let's get to Abraham Lincoln, because Abraham Lincoln is as important as Godzilla or an elephant. I was looking for something about we have to deal with reality versus the talking society. that water has become? And I said, I'm a firm believer in the people. If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts and beer. And I thought, wow, beer again. I didn't realize it was such an important part of the thinking of some of our most famous people. It's not totally surprising. It's just funny that it's in print. So I Googled one night, as those of us who do PowerPoint spend like ridiculous amounts of time in the middle of the night looking for pictures and stories and quotes. I Googled John F. Kennedy and beer, Robert F. Kennedy and beer, Martin Luther King and beer, and I got nothing. I did Ronald Reagan and beer, I got nothing. But I got this from Martin Luther, because it came up in the search, of course. And when I stopped, there's a period. Whoever drinks beer, he is quick to sleep long. Does not sin. Whoever does not sin enters heaven. Thus, let us drink beer. I don't know if it's true, but it was fun. Then I thought I better young this up, right? Because I'm starting to feel old. So I got Ice Cube, and I think to me, reality is better than being fake. And I think that is how I feel about all of this. That's my quote. And he also said the worst thing you can do about a situation is nothing. I like that too. Although why I'm quoting him is a mystery, because he also came up with Bye Felicia. And I am not going to explain that if you don't know. But I should not like him. That's all I'm saying. So here's our reality. We got lost of snowpack. Our population's going to rise. We got sea level rise, particularly here. Now you may look at where your house is and your property value, but it's going to rise. We're going to have to deal with it. It's going to be an even bigger problem in the Delta. We have to deal with it. Reality, the Delta really is the central challenge of our time for the state because it is the hub of our ecosystem, our rich ecological heritage, particularly salmon. It's not just about smelt, but smelt are more important than people make it sound as an ecological indicator. Our ecosystem there, the ecosystem there can't handle it. There's no ecosystem on the planet that has survived with that much water diverted from it. In part of the systems that you take it from, 80 to 90% is diverted for human use at critical times of the year. They can't survive it. We dammed all the refugia they dealt with in a drought. We have to fix that or we're going to lose it. But there are multiple ways to fix it. It's this hub for fish migration, hub for the water system. The fish aren't just an idea that are about that fish. They're about the ecosystem as a whole. They're about orca food. They're about the entire ecological system that we have. The reason some people say that the Central Valley farmland is so good is it's built on carcasses of millions and millions, probably trillions over time, of salmon that went up there and created a lot of the organic material that's up there. It's not dinosaurs, it's salmon. So we're part of a system and we have to actually recognize it, which is not to say that it's easy. So we have to handle the future differently than we have in the past, but we got to do it in a way that recognizes reality and honors the people that grow our food and fiber too. It's not is this or that, it's figuring out again how do you get to those both ands. And we are at a turning point on the Delta, make no mistake, a precipice where we're on the brink of losing it. So we have to make some hard choices. That's just one slide. I could give you a whole hour of ecosystem collapse. Agriculture is precious. We talked about that. It's really something to be honored, not something to be vilified. We haven't had statewide groundwater management. I said that's just a famous picture of a guy from USGS. It might be the Corps of Engineers, but I think it's USGS. He's standing at the bottom if you can't see it. It's where the ground is in 1977, which is when the picture is taken. The ground was up that top thing in 1925. Now that pole's not there, and the ground is sunk even more. Now, why does it matter that the ground is sinking? It doesn't feel like it when you're on the ground. Well, that means it compresses, particularly with clay layers, it's compressing the groundwater basin below it so that we can never fill it back up. It's not like an accordion that you can fill up again. So we're losing that storage space that we need. And it happened so rapidly during the drought with so much groundwater pumping that you had infrastructure collapsing, the flood control facilities running backwards, and the state and federal projects, let alone the state and federal projects can't deliver the amount of water they used to just because you've got the sinking. So there's a lot going on there we have to deal with, and we did. That just gives you a different sense of the data from space. This is where science and technology can help us, that help popularize the issue out there so people could see, and I think it helped lead to politicians not being able to avoid this issue and having the courage to take action. That included a lot of people in the Central Valley and Salinas, although I say they'd come up to me and grab my arm in coffee shops and bars and say, you have to do something about this, just don't tell anybody I told you so. So they'd bring it up in coffee shops and bars, but not at microphones. By the end, they were bringing it up at microphones, and there's more to it. We also have a lot of contaminated water and wells. Now, if you're in a big metropolitan area, like here we're sending on the Superfund site, it's fine. It's just the application of energy and money. You can treat it. It's not rocket science to treat water. Some is harder than others. It is rocket fuel. Yeah, that's right. Good point. I'm going to work that in a little rocket ship. But if you're in a small rural community or a small domestic well, this is the difference between being able to drink your water and not. So it is a big deal. It's something we've done a lot about. And our infrastructure is breaking inadequate at times. So when we build it back, we shouldn't just build gray infrastructure. We think about integrated, low-impact development, the kind of things that you all are doing. And so here now, we can do a lot about it. We can go shopping all around the world for these Mr. Potato solution parts. That metaphor is not going to last long. I'm going to give it up. But we can go to Israel, Let There Be Water is a book, and they talk about the amazing miracle in technology. They're exporting water as part of their diplomacy because of what they do. We're not in the same existential threat. We're a lot bigger. We have more water to begin with. But there's a lot we can learn from them that's comforting. It's the technology for what we need to do is not beyond our reach. Same Australia, more similar to us, reformed their water rights system recently in a way I'm not that keen on. But they reformed it 100 years ago in a way that might work for us, and they reformed it 100 years ago because they came over to CR and said, that's not very neighborly, cutting people off 100%, and they switched to shares. They gave the seniors more shares, and then they have two groups that share equally, so everybody is sharing the pain when they have to cut back. That's an interesting idea. They also went to town on stormwater capture, adding more trees during their drought, their 10-year millennial drought. Again, they had had the same 3 to 5 year drought cycle that we had had in the preceding 100 years, and then they hit a 10-year drought, which is also why we were panicked about the one we were in. The point of this is we don't have to reinvent every wheel. We just need to go shopping and pick the things that will work for us. And the reality is we've done a lot about it, but there's still a long way to go. We've talked about some of these things, but we've passed more legislation, got more programs started, put more money out to solve these problems and get people to integrate during the past 7 years than the past 70 years. Easily. Do we have to put that on speed and go faster? Yes, as I started, we all have to do everything faster and not make it so hard. But some great stuff that's going to yield great benefits that are really, really important. I'll talk about a couple of them. But we have a lot more to do, and not just on the issues I've talked about, but on things like PFAS and PFOA that have hit the news now, endocrine disruptors that were in the news more before but are still really important and scary, Chrome-6, lead, all kinds of things. Our ecosystems are collapsing. Our infrastructure isn't good. Bay Delta we haven't solved. Salton Sea we haven't solved. So there's a lot yet to do. But we spent a lot of money on it, which helps, I have to say, and done incentives. We said I've done a lot of water rights work in the past few years, again, just to start. The Groundwater Act that I talked about, the first set of plans are due like now, maybe this week, maybe. And so we'll see. It'll take a while. Safe drinking water, we set all kinds of standards that had been languishing. We've been consolidating agencies. We've gotten money out the door. We've done technical assistance. There's a chance to really get this done. The missing piece, the governor signed legislation to get money to fund operation and maintenance. We are subsidizing poor disadvantaged communities just to pay to operate it so they can actually get there. That was great. It's not that much money in the course of things. It came out of the wrong funding pot, but still, I'll take it. Water conservation efficiency, we've talked about. I mean, the state folks rose to the occasion, and we saved 24% in just 2 years. That was incredible. Largely on lawns, we did it that way, in terms of our calculation and our tiering. You had, in Southern California, the water agencies put out $500 million in rebate money for landscape conversion. And people, every tranche got spoken for within a couple of weeks. People get it. The agencies tend to be slower. In this case, the agencies stepped up, and that's why I think we were able to do it. We did all kinds of regulatory things that were helpful, too. I won't get into it. Clearly, there's a lot to do in urban resilience, and you're doing a lot of it, which is great. Recycled water really took off. We put over $1.5 billion in it because we saw the paradigm shifting to get projects from the drawing board and into the ground, and I think folks here hopefully are recipients of a lot. And the key to the future is to do even more of that And I just will mention a few of the local ones because I'm shifting to local now. Those were the state efforts. What's happening at the local level is taking off like I've never seen. These inflection points happen. The paradigm shift, it's slow. Some of the things a lot of us, the stuff we were talking about in local government 30 years ago is now happening. You could see it, but it takes a long time to make it happen. And it's happening in so many places. I probably can't cover them. I'm going to drop any of the international ones I was going to say, but there are things all over the state. I always have to say this because this was me, where I got my start on dealing with sewage in Santa Monica Bay. And what we ended up doing, it's a very long story about Hilda Bay, if you don't know it, was actually figuring out how to have a partnership with the city of LA folks, figuring out how to work with them versus just beating them up. I mean, it's not like those guys went to the Hyperion plant every day for the joy of manufacturing sewage so they could dump it in the ocean and kill all the fish. It's they were doing the best they could without enough money to deal with a river of human waste coming out 24 hours a day. It took a while and relationship building to figure that out, and then to figure out where our target needed to be, creating the political will to get them the resources they needed to do it, and to get the city to realize that doing good here was a good thing to do. And Mayor Bradley totally got it, and that's how I ended up running the Public Works Department, which is the most insane thing imaginable since I was the person suing the city over sewage just a few years before. But it's still kind of a big happy family down there where there's that. Speaking of LA, the mayor issued a call a few years ago to cut their reliance on imported water in half by 2035. He's since upped it to 70%, and just last year he announced 100% recycling of their water by 2035, and now they're going great guns to figure out how to get that done through conservation, cleaning up their groundwater basins, stormwater capture, and the like. Yesterday I spent much of the day at a charrette with people from the city, the county, different departments that wouldn't even speak to each other when I was there. I mean, the people at DWP and the people at County Public Works used to refer to me as that woman all the time, which is different than it is today, where I was in a room with people from all across the county, which is like as big as the whole Bay Area, figuring out how to make their systems work together, figuring out you capture stormwater, you build these detention facilities so you can meter it out to the plants to help get the solids to the plant because people are conserving so much. When you have enough of it, you send it down for recycling so it can go for other things. You send it into a groundwater basin to save it, and you can do it through sensors and telemetry. And they're figuring out how to do trades and all the things they need to do to make it work. It's incredibly complicated, but it's incredibly exciting to watch them do it. Folks in the Bay Area are starting to talk about it, particularly with regard to recycling. You saw the Valley Water agreement with Mountain View and Palo Alto last week. I was involved in a 2-day charrette on that. I'm involved in a lot more. That's finally moving up here, as opposed to how do I become sustainable in my own bubble? It's how do we give up a little bit and figure out how to make the best use. Orange County, biggest indirect potable reuse of wastewater in the world. They use it for groundwater replenishment. They have now signed up for all of the wastewater in Orange County, and they're going to find more in other satellite communities. It's sort of similar to Valley Water, wanting to get more because they need to replenish the groundwater basin. That's happening everywhere. The water replenishment dish, I'm just going to say, these guys had a 15-year plan to get off the necessity of imported water, and they did it. It was so cool to be at the ribbon cutting of this new building where they now have 4 million people that are total locally reliant. They take imported water when they can to replenish it, but it's pretty amazing, and they have all this extra space. So now LA City and LA County are going to be sending recycled water there, and they're going to have massive accounting. This is not easy. Talk about complexity and flexibility. San Diego, which people think about in terms of desal, and they have the largest facility in California, might be the largest in the country now. That makes some sense to them. Why? It's only 7% of their supply, but they're at the bottom of all these pipes. They're junior water users, and they don't have a groundwater basin to put recycled water or stormwater in. But they are the leaders in pushing for as close to direct potable as is sort of comfortable, and putting it in reservoir augmentation. And that is also going to help them at their sewage treatment plant, because why go to tertiary treatment or secondary treatment to dump it in the ocean when you can just use that money to pump it up, treat it, and put it in your reservoirs? It's pretty exciting. And also, they have that cool Leonardo da Vinci thing that says water is the driver of nature, which I really like. What's another one? Sacramento, doing a massive rebuild, $1.5 billion rebuild to do recycled water, where they were the biggest ammonia putter, into nutrient putter into the delta, which wasn't good for fish and wildlife, wasn't good for drilling, wasn't good for anybody. They're now going to be doing groundwater recharge, which is going to help the ecosystem along the Cosumnes, raise groundwater levels there. It's like the gift that's going to keep on giving. It's really impressive. I don't have time to spend a lot of time on the Central Valley, but the Central Valley has a lot of really innovative work going on to figure out what's known as managed aquifer recharge. How do we take those wet moments and get it into the ground? The lore has been that you can't let fields sit even in the winter, particularly vines and trees in water. Don Cameron is spending a lot of time, lifelong farmer, doing a lot of work to show that you can do more than the conventional wisdom, and he's awesome working with sustainable conservation. And there are plenty more where that came from. We're talking about upper watersheds and figuring out how to thin trees. You've heard it in the wildfire context, but how do you thin them enough that more snow can fall through and not sit up on the canopy to melt, but you still have enough shade that it doesn't melt out that fast. So a lot of creative thinking happening there. And on urban sustainability, you've got stormwater issues. And just as I was talking about recycling, I just want to say LA came together, took them 3 times to do it over a decade, but they finally did, and passed a measure that's going to give $300 million per year, like forever, no sunset, to be able to do these multi-benefit stormwater capture, water recharge, flood control, urban greening. It's awesome. Closer to home, just lest I forget you, your equivalent is pretty incredible here. Dealing with that sea level rise, the Bay Area came together like never before. You know, we've got 9 counties, 100 cities, maybe playing fast and loose with the city number, but you know what I mean. Came together and you all passed a $500 million measure, not to build higher seawalls, but to do terraced wetlands. And you've got examples, I don't even have all of them here, you have examples all over the place, the Shoreline Project, etc., coming together, creating a Bay Restoration Authority. I think Dave Pine is the chair, supervisor in San Mateo, who I would make king if I could. And it's an amazing story through a visual of not just dealing with one problem, but dealing with multiple problems, the access to open space. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and you have true confessions. My husband runs this thing, but he'd be the first to tell you his staff, who have already gone and done an adaptation atlas that just came out to show every local area what's your land use, what are the best things you could do to deal with sea level. It's already there. The draft is already there for everybody to use, and a lot of communities are using it. And you look at right here in your own backyard, look at Google. Their goal is net zero. It's not just government doing everything, it's the private sector. Net zero water use in terms of that, recycling, they're doing black water recycling, they're watering, they're ones that have detention basins, and they're doing beautiful stuff. They're going to have enough water to export to other people for use. They're going to flush their toilets with what they recycle. They're going to water everything. They're going to deal with that. They're going to keep their potable use down to a minimum, and it's awesome. But it took the regulators a while to figure out how to make it work. They kept thanking me, and I just said, I just hired the right guy. I told you to ask him. So there are different people in regulations that have to do it. Now I'm going to go faster because I'm running out of time. Here's just another picture, and think that becomes an urban amenity. That's for the public in Mountain View. That's just a little picture of what it looks like there. But there's potential everywhere, including here, which is a part of it that I'm going to get to. I love your climate change plan. I can't remember the name. I have to look down. Sunnyvale Climate Action Playbook. Because that thing talks about public engagement. I've never seen something open that well. So thank you to all of you who are engaged in that. It's really a cool plan. And then you have all this stuff right next door to Moffett Field, which is where a lot of this work by Google is going, and your engagement in that is going to be important. And hopefully the other slides I did get in. There's your resilience vision. This is bringing not just that closed bubble, but also dealing with your physical characteristics, dealing with nature right in your own backyard. There's also a lot of work in here about how to re-oak and bring back native plants and habitat that are suited to this region, suited to the wildlife, suited to the climate, suited to everything versus the artificial way, well-intentioned, that we did everything, but it doesn't really serve us for the future. Nature-based solutions are the thing that can deal with flexibility and complexity, because nature is flexible and complex. So there's a lot of partners, including you, and really innovative with all those things I talked about. We have stuff in Monterey that also brings in agricultural water, storm water, recycled water, replenished groundwater basins to deal with agricultural water needs, but also to save the Carmel River. San Francisco, your neighbor, is the leader in on-site recycling. If you're doing a big building, you have to do this on-site, like Salesforce or the others. And they did that because the private sector wanted it. for their own resilience, and also to show the public and their employees that they were going to be good stewards. And I encourage you to take their tour. But they actually require it. It's not just their building. It's kind of incredible for large ones. And some of the buildings you see all the time are actually treating their everything from their bathrooms on, and then they're using it to flush their toilets for their on-site, and they can share it across to other places. Data and technology, I said, are changing fast. We've got to change with it. Those are real opportunities in sensors that allow for distributed treatment without being afraid. This is really big, so I should save more time for it. And then again, to get to this issue of the human dynamic, I love this Yogi Berra. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. And that's why we got to deal with the fact that every place is different, and you got to do a bunch of stuff, and you got to do a bunch of stuff with people. So we need more resilient institutions. We're totally fragmented, not just how many little water agencies we have, but you've got the flood control people, different from the water supply people, different from the wastewater people, different from the parks people, and increasingly they're coming together. You've got a lot of that together in Valley Water, and you have pieces of it in different, but we're going to have to find ways to do that, because people have to be able, either through big institutions or just through agreements, to figure out how to work with each other to do this synergistic and cumulative and work it together. And we can overcome it by making relationships easier. But working across the traditional geographic and functional divides is really tough, but we have to do it. There are a lot of signs of hope. We need more resilient relationships and more resilient conversations. We've got to break down barriers between all of these different players. You see it up there, but it's much easier said than done. I could say a lot, but I won't. So I can get to what you want to talk. Oh, there I am, my favorite slide. Wait, let me go back. This is a Chinese phrase. I can't say it in Chinese anymore. I used to be able to do that because I was a Chinese studies major, but I was bad at the language, which is why you have me in the environmental world. But like a chicken talking to a duck, which is they're talking past each other. So engineers speak a certain language, the public speak. Scientists speak a certain language, you name it. Lawyers speak a certain language. It makes sense to them, and they think they're disagreeing, but you actually need to translate and take some time to do it. I call this the challenge of ecosystem management as opposed to eco. System management, if you look at my Twitter handle, I say ecosystem manager, which is more of what I do. It's amazing how people can fight. You can see they're not disagreeing, they're just speaking a different language. And someday I'll come and do my 1-hour ecosystem management talk with tips, like during the drought. I'm just saying. It's terrible with everybody yelling at us, which we're trying to do with water. People look at everything like this in a Venn diagram. There's no overlap in our interests. They can't possibly be. I like this one because, of course, as you can tell from me, I'm a popular culture girl. That's my Valley thing. It's not the light. And I really like wombats. So this one was my favorite. But this is more what it is. It's more complex, as I say. Well, my view is, if this guy can maintain compassion and meet people where they are, considering what Tibet's been through with the Chinese, and you can bring up Nelson Mandela, you can bring up anybody, then we can do it a little bit to have compassion for a regulator or the public or an engineer or a scientist who isn't communicating exactly the way we do. And the fact is we can do this. The fact that we're all in this together, that was the clarion call of the governor. That was what the public wanted to hear during the drought. And frankly, we went around agencies to talk directly to the public. And they wanted it, and they wanted action, and they wanted us all to work together. So how do we get there? Again, clear-eyed focus on those decades ahead versus the ones behind us, a both-and approach, embracing complexity and action, etc. A lot of ands. And remember this, of course, lawns are not essential to modern civilization. I'm not saying kill all your green stuff, and so what can all of us do as a close? I'm just saying whatever you can. I've spent 30 years in this world from that mid-'80s on, and people are always confessing their eco-sins to me, or they're intimidated because they don't think they can do everything. They can't bring a container everywhere they go. Don't worry about it. Just do whatever you can. I could confess my eco-sins. Do as much as you can and do a little more later. Do what works for you. We're all different, but there are a lot of us. So it has a profound impact. Don't be daunted by it. Let's do all those things on the back table. Use your purchasing power to buy or not to buy. Look at the National Geographic calculator. I thought I was doing pretty good on water. I only have one plant. I take short showers. All kinds of things. But it includes the stuff you buy. and how much water it takes to make your electronics, your clothes, and everything. And I felt shame. So look at that and get a sense of what you can do. Change out your landscape if you can afford it. Take a rebate if you can get it. They can be beautiful. And I just want to say Beyond Burgers are quite tasty. You should eat less meat. I'm not a zealot about that, but it just is when you look at the numbers, and you'll see that on the calculator. And chemicals, the highest, the thing that has the most toxicity in the urban area is the use of pesticides around our houses. That means spraying them on the concrete instead of right next to the house, using too much, then hosing down the driveway. We are the problem in terms of urban toxicity. It's not the motor oil. That degrades. It's other things. It's the zinc on the fences. It's the copper in brake pads. But frankly, it's the overuse of chemicals. So they can be your friend or foe. Just use them judiciously. That's important. And as you could tell from what I say, own your power. So I used to be an organizer. Own your power as a member of this community. You know, rise the occasion versus find the minimum or argue for it. You let them know you're willing to pay a little bit more for it if they spend your money wisely. It's not a blank check, but say you want them to do the right thing. Let them know you have your back, particularly people who do the right thing. It's as important as calling out the ones that don't. They really appreciate it. People suck up, but they don't say thank you to elected officials enough. It's a very hard job. I would never do it. Lose all privacy. All that stuff. People are always mad at you. Everywhere you go in the supermarket, I would at least admit, people were mad at me, but it was in my hearing room, you know, somewhat anonymous. And show up and be heard. You know, the New York Times, democracy dies in darkness. Sorry.
Washington Post.
Washington Post, sorry, thank you. I should have written it down, see? I get them both, I get confused. I see it every day. Thank you for that correction. I'll write an apology note. Other thing is learn your watershed, own the whole, and not just comes out of your tap. You own the delta here. You need to step up. Let them know you care about it, because right now this whole area is kind of AWOL on the delta conversation, quietly taking advantage of what's going on and not saying if you're going to do it in an environmentally responsible way. So own it. Ask for 21st century thinking and solutions versus what's simple, and push for, let the politicians know that you care about healthy communities, healthy farmers, and a healthy ecosystem, that it's all important to you, that not to pit one against the other, and engage at the other levels as well. What can cities do? Think resilience for the long view, not just about sustainability in your own domain or bubble. Own your impact. Big goals across multiple disciplines and geographic life. Partner with neighbors. I just listed a few groups of cities that are doing really progressive things. There are more. Hire, train, encourage creative, innovative staff, and give them the time to think and engage with other agencies. That tends to not be built into their work plan. You can't do these complex multi-agency things unless you have time to do multiple meetings, get to know each other. I'm not saying like have them go out for beers with everybody in every agency all the time, although that would not be a bad idea, to try and figure out how to build a community. Communities of resilience around climate are growing around the Bay Area all the time. We're going to grow them on recycled water too. It needs to happen. It's a human thing that makes the difference. And communicate. Businesses, own your impact, audit, be state of the art. I put in have compassion for regulators just because I wanted to. Because it's hard to be a regulator, not just trying to make their life miserable, you're actually trying to protect the public, and it's a very difficult role. And frequently, regulators have their own language, and they tend to be ISTJs. I'm not going to explain that on Myers-Briggs. They tend to like paper and matrices and not going out and talking to people. So you got to call them out and ask them to help you do something more innovative versus making it hard for them. For the early adopters in the business community, thank you. For laggards, get it together and join others to move the needle. There are all kinds of groups. Regulators, and this applies to these two, they need to lean in to be a partner versus thinking they have to control everything. It is very hard to be flexible on these things when you're working across, but we've got to figure out a way to support them. They may make some mistakes, but we've got to support them doing that, and they've got to put money out there to incentivize this kind of work, and that's happening. But practice resilient relationships in general. You have more power than the powerful want you to know. And it gets more and more extreme the higher up in government you get. What you do matters, what you say matters. Everyone is a potential ally in the fight to deal with climate change, and everyone's a potential ally in making the world and each community a more livable, sustainable, and resilient place. It is about ecosystem management. When I think of this, I always think about Robert F. Kennedy. It says, few will have the greatness to bend history itself. But each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation. And had the likes of him for far too short a time, but it's our time now to step up and do this. Humans have to be the solution and not the problem. And it's about inspiring people, ourselves and each other, not about controlling them. And it's about harnessing their spirits and their talents and their creativity or just their political force. It's about finding strength through connection in a world where the forces of disenfranchisement and division are strong and powerful, but where movements can turn the tide if people feel connected and a part of something. So it's not just about developing a shared vision, it's about needing to be able to base that vision and strong relationships on developing shared data, shared language, and shared sense of community. Not easy, and it's not for the faint of heart. Everyone has to step outside their comfort zone to do it, but if we do it, we can make a whole difference where we don't have to worry about what's going to happen when the wells dry out, the species die out, and we're left in a sterile world with our grandchildren wondering what the heck were they thinking and why didn't they do anything about it on climate, on water, on plastics, on anything you can imagine. It's amazing that water brings these things to a head. It's essential for life, ours, creatures, flora and fauna, and if we don't give it the breadth of effort or the focused effort it requires in most places, it's managed and treated as a commodity or as the stuff of politics. And it is actually a magical substance, not in the Harry Potter sense, but in a much more amazing sense, and deserves more respect and reverence that we give it most of the time. We need to treat water and each other and ourselves with more respect and reverence every single day. It's all about choices, not just by leaders, but by myriad individuals, not just in what a scientist chooses to study, a litigator chooses what lawsuit a lawyer chooses to bring, or a project that engineers decide to build with a greater green. It's about those myriad decisions we choose to make every day, in every meeting and in every interaction. Those conversations and broader communications lead to a sense of connection in the larger whole, and that leads to public support and political support that follows for action of all kinds that we need to take. So whether it's poetry or a poster on the bathroom mirror, a tinkling mass of bracelets like I do that does it for you, let's approach this work as compassionate colleagues, as leaders, and as a community of practice to make it happen. I mean, by choosing to be here, you voted with your feet to be connected to your colleagues and community in a way that is incredibly important. So thank you for the honor of joining you and for hanging with me for longer than I should have spoken. So thank you for that. I'm happy to take it.
So we have some microphones that are going around the audience, so if you could just, so there's a question right here. Can we get a microphone over here?
All right.
I'm concerned about fracking on federal lands in California. Does California as a state have power to confront the federal government that wants to engage in fracking on federal land?
That is such a good question that came to a head after I left, and I don't want to play lawyer even though I am a lawyer. There are certain things where state law definitely applies to the federal government, like in water and their water rights for the federal projects, despite the litigation being filed and their statements to the contrary. I'm not sure. There's plenty of fracking on state land that's regulated more strictly here than anywhere in the country because of SB4 and public pressure to do that. I don't know on federal lands whether they have to. I apologize. I can find out. I should know. Does anybody know the answer? I should know the answer to that, and I don't want to freelance. It's a very good question. If you give me your contact info, I'll find the answer and get it to you. Yeah.
I have a question that may have been already answered, but at one point, Sacramento did not have water meters in a lot of areas.
Good question.
And I don't know if they ever changed that or why not.
They've been awesome, actually. As a matter of fact, there's a state law that requires it. I think it was from 1995, and they had until around now. Maybe they may have till 2005. But during the drought, they changed their program up and accelerated it. They kind of put it on speed to do it faster. But because they didn't have water meters, they had the toughest outdoor irrigation requirements of any major city, and they cleaned everybody's clock. in terms of water use reduction. They also had that empty Folsom they were looking at, you know, right in their neighborhood, but they win the prize for what they did during the drought, and they accelerated their program. They may even be done by now. And the reason their program took a little while longer is they put in smart meters. So they went from no meters to smart meters, so that you can send information and bills and all the things that people say really work. A lot of the inland cities, I think Bakersfield, Fresno may be metered now, but it was legislation, and it may have been, it was either the 2009 Delta Reform Act that made them do it. It might be. But now everybody has to. But Sacramento did really well without the meters, and they took other action. So they were the ones that I think got some of the Southern California and other areas to really step it up. In Southern California, they've done more conservation than almost anywhere else because they went through that big drought in the early 90s. So most of their areas are more efficient, not all of them, but a lot of them, the major metropolitan areas are. No one's as good as San Francisco and Santa Cruz, who are like 40 gallons per capita per day. They don't have a lot of lawns in San Francisco, but that's not to minimize how low they have. You don't need all that water for modern living, so it's an interesting dynamic.
So could you wait for the microphone for a second?
I don't know if it works, but anyway. Hi, I just have 3 quick comments that have to do with the environment and water. But I do have one request. When all these park-like settings are made, like, it would be great if there was like food grown, you know, because I know there's a lot about natural plants, but we're so cemented that I think growing food might be a good use.
Yeah, some places are doing a lot of, it's sort of urban gardens on speed. It's a good idea.
And then this is about, I walk about an hour a day in most neighborhoods, and how it relates to water. The leaf blowers blow leaves into the street, and I think we're going to have asthma problems, all of us. I mean, I go for a walk, and I have to cover my face, and I should wear a mask. But those leaves go down into the storm drains.
Right, and they end up having to be cleaned out, and they end up adding. If they make it all the way to waterways, sometimes it's fine. I mean, it's getting a natural thing that's going to degrade, but it's a huge maintenance expense, and there are all kinds of places putting in traps and so on. I'm a big fan of brooms myself.
I know.
So
I
that's
mean,
sort of
whatever
thing.
happens to the
Brooms
rain.
and composting, I think, are the way to go there.
And the other thing is, in my opinion, if you're not going to put water in the street sweepers, don't do it. I have like 1/8 of an inch of dirt all over everything, and I'm getting too old to run ahead of the sweepers on my walks.
That's an interesting point. A lot of communities use recycled water in their street sweeping, which is kind of, LA does it. They just have different filling stations. But doing them without water sort of kind of defeats the purpose.
It just flows around dirt. Now I think I at least feel like I can definitely have allergies. And then there's a lot of toxins that they're blowing. Because one of my neighbors is tearing down his house, and all that dirt gets into the street. And so all the toxins are going all over.
He's not following the rules for stormwater construction rules. That it shouldn't be, but I'm sure it is in a lot of places. That's interesting. We had, the street maintenance was in Public Works, and we used recycled water.
Well, you should recommend they hear things or not.
Well, no, that's, folks here should be taking notes. You're all taking notes, right? Hey, Margaret. Hey.
Really quick question. I'm not sure if this is working, so I will just speak loudly.
That's
Okay. You've emphasized how important the Delta is. What are the top 3 things that could be done in the Delta, and who needs to support those things?
Oh, that's very good. I'll tell you, if I pick 3, more water needs to be allowed to flow naturally so that nature can do its nature thing. The exact amount, you can argue about it, the timing, you can argue about it, but we've taken too much out for the ecosystem to survive. So we've got to figure out how to put it back, at least some of it. You know, we have proposals that we passed a year ago on the San Joaquin. There are ones that hopefully will come out on the Sacramento. You need more water. You need more natural habitat restoration. There's a lot of work in floodplain recreation. Rice growers are trying to figure out how to let the little fish onto their fields, leave more water on the fields in the other parts of the year so that they can eat the leftover rice grain and fatten up and get their metabolism set before they make the gauntlet out. That's a huge thing. All of the floodplain restoration and making it, again, returning nature to the system rather than having it be channelized. Those two things are, I think, really important. So more water and more habitat. I also think that's a place where more resilient conversations is pretty important, because it's a place where habits die hard and people pick on each other and yell at people, and we can't forget the amazing people in the Delta, which is a very fragile and wondrous place. It's not that far from you, you've probably been there, but you have legacy communities, you've got people growing incredible food. It's sitting through the Bay Delta Water Fix hearings, and the Delta folks coming up and talking was, I kept just wanting to go to the wineries, drink pear cider, go have some asparagus. It was like incredible. But if you've ever been there, it's really remarkable. So I think we need to elevate sort of water literacy in California so people realize the Delta is a treasure that belongs to all of us too, and we need to have some compassion there as opposed to the way the big guys treat them. I'm just saying. Those would be, if I pick three of those.
And who needs to support it?
Everybody. Who needs to support it? We do. Yeah.
You mentioned early on in your talk that we in Sunnyvale have done a pretty good job. But I wonder, in terms of where the state needs to go, if we are to do our fair share, at least, how much farther do we have to go in terms of water conservation?
It's hard to say. I mean, where you are at 108, you're about where LA is. You're not bad at that. You're good. I wouldn't take anything from you. You're about where LA is. So you can look at, you don't have to be where San Francisco is because you have larger lawns and you need trees. Got everybody, during the drought, I was like, wash your hands, water your trees, and drink all you want. We need that green space to survive the heat stuff and just to live in a livable place. Just making it clean so there aren't any parts per billion floating around it doesn't do what humans need. Humans need that interaction with nature. So I think in conservation, one can do more. I think part of the reason why this area is ahead, though, is you have this very interesting challenge. Again, every place is different. The whole Santa Clara Valley Water District, now Valley Water, was created because basically, I'm going to oversimplify this for the technical people. Sorry, I apologize. San Jose was going to sink because of overpumping. With subsidence isn't just in the Central Valley. And so the reason they're panicked and they want everybody's wastewater is they need to generate groundwater recharge, not just to supply water, but to keep those groundwater tables up. And so conservation and recycling are sort of a must-do here, not a nice-to-do. So there's both how do you contribute to the state, but it's really at a local level, there's more incentive, which is why folks were saying make the rules higher for us. And you guys were doing really well, so you were like at 8% or 12% targets. The folks in a lot of parts of the state that were using 6 times as much water got 36% targets. And they moaned a lot longer. If you do the math, they didn't have to get anywhere near you, and they still moaned. But again, it is hotter. It takes twice as much water to water a tree. You don't want to say no trees in Riverside, so it's interesting. Thank you, Steve.
I feel like you wanted 2 more questions.
Yeah, and then I'll hang around too, so.
Felicia, can you talk to the UN SDGs and how we can apply specifically SDG 6, which focuses on water, and how we could use that as an example or as a platform, and not just use SDG 6, but use the other 17 as a way of changing our thinking around water?
That is such a good question. It's interesting because I'll give you a candid answer. And the candid answer is we need to have an answer to that. And I have a mix. I've been thinking about it a lot because in the time since I left the state board, I've been doing a lot of international travel and speaking, largely because I want to work in that arena. I started in that arena when I was in Asian studies, and then I left it to go in the environmental world. So at this stage in my life, it's nice to pull them together. And it was nice, that people asked me and I could say yes, which I couldn't do when I was at the state board. And California's experience is actually of interest to people all over the world, and I've joined this consulting group. It was on the first slide, the water policy group of ex-high-level water officials to band together to be accompanying assistance to folks in the developing world, so they don't get taken advantage of by big consulting groups, and they just get a peer group to help them. It's not to make money, you might get our way paid, but it's more of a volunteer kind of a thing to do. And I'm going to go to South Africa and India on World Bank and say, I mean, some people are saying, so you're spending more time around people who deal with the SDGs. The SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals out of the UN. And if you just Google them, you'll see this really, it looks almost like the periodic table.
It's beautiful.
This really nice little chart of squares of, how many of them are there? 17?
17.
Set goals for what we need as a society. People are thinking about what we need to do to survive as a society, and SDG 6 is about water and sanitation. And obviously sanitation, having water at all is critical to life, but sanitation and bacteria and pathogens, that kills a lot of people. So it's a really high priority. But I found in the US nobody talks about it or thinks about it because we're so locally, especially on water, localized and overly fragmented. I've been working the last few years just to get people to think California, let alone, their own bubble. But I think there are people who would, and I suspect this is part of your question because you know about it, that would be inspired by being part of something even that big. And it seems wrong that it's only the folks in Davos who are talking about it who aren't in the international infrastructure or aren't in the international consulting. So I've been thinking about that question, and I don't have an answer yet, which is we need to find ways. I mean, if I won the lottery, I would spend a lot of money on communications experts to try and get the media to cover these, because there's just a million cool stories of things. I mean, even if you look at India and their, it's not very poetic, their anti-defecation campaign, but they've made remarkable progress in getting a toilet within 100 yards of everyone. Some of them are, joint bathrooms, but they didn't have bathrooms at all before. I mean, it's a massive, massive undertaking. And then you also have on the water supply and drinking water side these amazing stories of folks doing small water projects that international aid and NGOs are working on, and yet we don't talk about it here very much. So I think you put your finger on a need. The thing I don't know, because I'm not an expert there, is can we move people enough? Will enough people be captured by that to give us more oomph in what we do? We've used it a little bit in the context, and the UN was helpful in the turnaround in the Central Valley in particular, because the UN, I think it's Special Envoy for Human Rights came out, Catalina, I can't remember her last name, and she exposed, they got media around this issue even before the drought, and that led to passage of the human right to water in California, the first state to have that. Didn't give a lot of teeth, but it was a policy direction, and then people like the folks in the State Board and Drinking Water have taken it to town to deal with how we prioritize enforcement, the things we ask for, the partnerships with communities. And so I told her successor in Madrid at the waterside agreements just in December, I said, has anyone come back to you to say what happened after that report you guys did? He said no. And I told him the story. He was like, you gotta send me stuff. But it really had an impact, at least in raising that. Now, how much the SDG part of it played in, I'd have to go back and look at the stories. But I think a concerted campaign would be worth trying to do. Yeah. It's a long answer, but I was spending a lot of time thinking about it and puzzling as to whether it's too wonky or whether it would inspire.
I think it's inspiring a lot of folks out there because it's actually taking them to action to the next level.
Yeah, all over the world. Absolutely all over the world. The question is, will California listen to something outside California? I always talked about Philadelphia and DC that are doing really cool things ahead of us on affordability and on stormwater capture too, but there's some pretty cool stuff that's ahead of us in water, even in this country. There was another question over here.
We have time for one more question.
And then I'll hang around.
I think there was you wanted to ask a question for a while here, so let's get you a microphone.
Sorry, my answers are long, because I am a nerd.
Yeah. Here in Sunnyvale, our water treatment plant is right on the bay.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case for many cities.
Yeah. Gravity works is a slogan that those of us in wastewater
are there any plans to when sea level rises another 6 to 10 feet?
Well, you would know, Monsieur, here what the thinking is, but there's a lot of thinking going on about it all up and down the coast. In fact, the Coastal Commission and the Water Board didn't fund a project with our state revolving loan money in Morro Bay because they wanted to rebuild a plant right where it was, and we said you got to move it up if we're going to fund a 30 to 50-year investment.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of thinking about it, but also part of what's happening with the wastewater plants is people are thinking about full cycle recycle so that you can build around it. You can do these satellite upstream treatment to necessitate not having to rebuild it in certain places. But even in LA, they've tried to figure out Hyperion, the massive thing down in El Segundo. They're going to be treating it and pumping it all the way to the valley and above for retreatment and flow. And they can show you how, by greening their energy system, they can do it without, despoiling the air. So it's a systems thing.
Yeah, I just want to add that Sunnyvale is also working with with Valley Water. We're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the sea level rise. So, and there was a question earlier about how is Sunnyvale doing, where we're going to be in water conservation. I just want to let you know that the state is looking at a goal of 55 gallons per day
It will
per
go
capita.
much lower once the studies are done, but yeah.
Internally, and Sunnyvale is already there for internal use on how much we're using inside the house. Doesn't include irrigation, but that's part of the goal that was initially about a year ago, about 55 gallons a day. So I just want to, as a follow-up to your question.
Yeah, indoor. The modern average is lower because of fixture turnover. Modern fixtures are just, so the indoor is really more like the modern new buildings and retrofits are more like 30 to 40 per capita, that's per person. And then outdoors is where it really varies by climate and landscape. But over half of urban water use is outdoors, so that's a big reservoir.
So that's all the time we have for questions. I know Felicia's going to stay around for a few minutes anyway, and if you have more questions, she'll be happy to talk to you about them. So let's thank Felicia one more time. Let me remind you that our next event is March 11th, right here, and hope to see you all then. Traffic. We can have our